The presentation of anarchism as social philosophy which aims at the emancipation, economic, social, political, and spiritual of the human race. The emancipation.
Anarchist Essays is brought to you by Loughborough University's Anarchism Research Group. For more information on the ARG, see the link in the show notes or follow us on Twitter at ARGLBORO.
Anarchism, Orthodoxy and Latin America. A look at Orthodox contributions to anarchism in Latin America by McGeoch. This essay presents anarchism, Christian Orthodoxy and Latin America. It was part of a research project with Orthodox Christian theologians and scholars. And a word of explanation. In this essay, orthodoxy, or Christian orthodoxy, refers to Eastern or Oriental Christianity. It does not discuss Roman Catholicism or Protestantism, the two forms of Christianity most prevalent in Latin America and perhaps most familiar to the listeners. The story of anarchism and orthodoxy in Latin America is one of a squeezed presence. Anarchism, understood as a 19th century political movement linked to the thought and the practice of figures like Proudhon, Bakunin, Kropotkin, Malatesta, is squeezed on two fronts. Firstly, often the literature in Latin America focuses on nationalism and nation-state building in newly independent Latin American states in this period, and anarchism is a largely anti-nationalist and anti-statist political movement, and therefore it's overlooked in the scholarship that frames Latin America's political struggles in terms of nationalism or interprets politics through the prism of the state. Secondly, labour and revolutionary literature, so-called leftist scholarship, is dominated by Marxist scholarship in the Latin American region, and this tends to downplay or omit anarchist contributions because they were viewed as unorthodox contributions to the more prominent political project of implementing an orthodox socialism, at least in terms of that being set out by Lenin and the incoming Russian Revolution. This Marxist revisionism has downplayed the presence and contribution of anarchism to politics, especially left-wing politics in the region. Anarchism and anarchist ideas enter Latin America as early as the 1860s. The French Antilles has groups affiliated to the First International, and soon Mexico, the River Plate region, that's Argentina and Uruguay, followed by Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Panama and Guatemala, have peasant movements, student libertarians, and working class struggles informed by the ideas and practices of Proudhon and Bakunin. Now, not all Latin American countries developed formally organised or affiliated anarchist labour movements, but anarchist ideas circulated freely amongst a number of different kinds of groups, ranging from trade unions through to the military. Anarchism spread through organising, class struggle, and particularly through the arts, literature, theatre and pamphlets. There were also a number of practical and educational communitarian initiatives which drew anarchists into close contact with indigenous peoples in Argentina, Mexico and Peru. Alongside this spread of anarchism and anarchist ideas in Latin America, Angel Capelletti outlines the importance of understanding anarchism as a European import to Latin America, and one that's circulating amongst different groups, national, ethnic and linguistic, identified by waves of migration to Latin America in the 19th and 20th century. In particular, Latin America's relationship with anarchism is profoundly shaped by anarcho-syndicalism, a revolutionary anti-political movement, which in turn is influenced and linked to waves of Italian, German and Slavic migration to Latin America at the turn of the 20th century. This observation is important for two reasons. Like anarchism, Orthodox Christianity is imported to Latin America on waves of migration in the 19th and 20th centuries. Furthermore, just as anarchism is squeezed in the political science literature about Latin America, Orthodox Christianity is squeezed in the historical and theological literature about the region. While the first Orthodox Church is consecrated as early as 1901 in the River Plate region in Buenos Aires in Argentina, Orthodox Christians migrate to Latin America throughout the 19th century from the fallout of geopolitics in the Ottoman Empire, Tsarist Russia, and the Greek peninsula. Recent ethnographic scholarship has helped to piece together some of this fragmentary history. In the field of theology, the Western Church, that is Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, dominates theology in Latin America. Standard textbooks on the history of Christianity in the region focus on the participation of Roman Catholicism in the colonial enterprises and turn to Protestant missions during the independence era. It leaves the impression that there are only Roman Catholic and Protestant churches in the region. This is not the case. Let's think a little about the Orthodox presence in anarchism in Latin America. What emerges from the literature, despite the squeeze on anarchism as a political movement and orthodoxy as an import on waves of migration, is the presence and contribution of both to the political practice in the region. Anarchism in Latin America has a direct connection to a number of leading figures of anarchism as a political movement. Bakunin, for example, spent 2 weeks in Panama in 1861 as part of his journey through 4 years of exile, taking in Japan, Europe and the Americas. A leading figure in promoting anarchism and libertarian socialism in Mexico is Plotino Rodocanati. He published the first anarchist pamphlets in Mexico, and his short stay from 1861 to 1864 sowed the seeds of class struggle and pacifism as underpinnings of anarchism and social struggles in Mexico. Bakunin and Rodocanati's presence in Latin America and participation in the promotion of anarchism in the social struggles is particularly interesting for reflections about anarchism and orthodoxy in Latin America. Both anarchists are fruit of orthodoxy in Russia and in Greece, and they have very different views in their anarchist practices regarding Orthodox Christianity. Davor Dzalto has noted that Bakunin's bitterly anti-church and anti-religion position is rooted in his opposition to the oppressive state structures supported by ecclesial structures and the ideology of a certain kind of Orthodox Christianity. The specific context for the development of Bakunin's bitter perspective is Tsarist Russia. His critique of religion, therefore, is rooted in an experience of Russian Orthodox Christianity, and therefore in his rejection of that form of Orthodox Christianity in Tsarist Russia. Rodocanati, on the other hand, advocates a quite different approach within anarchism in Mexico. Like Bakunin, he shared an aristocratic background. His is Greek, while Bakunin's is Russian. They both had an interest in German idealist philosophy and a commitment to people's struggles to overcome imperialism, and they both shared the direct influence of Proudhon from their time spent together in Paris. However, Rodocanati does not share Bakunin's bitter rejection of orthodoxy. Angelo Caballetti notes that Rodocanati argues for the necessity of religion and the superiority of Christianity over all other religions. Rodocanati also presents two interesting readings of orthodoxy, which will prove important to both versions of anarchism sympathetic to Christianity and to understandings of orthodoxy in the 20th century. Firstly, Rodocanati is clear that both Roman Catholicism and Protestantism degrade primitive and authentic Christianity. And in this, Rodocanati is anticipating Orthodox critiques of the Western Church in the 20th century. These critiques are led by George Florovsky, but are present in other Orthodox theologians ranging from Sergius Bulgakov in Russia to Christos Ioannaris in Greece. Rhoda reads Roman Catholicism and Protestantism as assimilating too much of Enlightenment rationalism at the expense of patristics. Rhoda also roots the anarchist principles of love, freedom, and equality in a primitive form of Christianity without priesthood, dogma, liturgy, and hierarchy. Rhoda understanding of the role of Orthodox Christianity in promoting the anarchist tendencies of love, freedom, and equality in the Mexican struggle has found echo in Davor Dzalto's recent wider study about anarchism and orthodoxy. Dzalto identifies and analyzes what he called a proto-anarchism in orthodoxy. This proto-anarchism in orthodoxy depends on a rereading of the patristics in Dzalto, the sources in primitive Christianity, and in part it's associated with the movement led by Nicholas Berdyaev, exploring freedom, creativity, and love. Back to Rhoda. His sympathetic inclusion of primitive Christianity in the anarchist practice in Latin America finds echoes in the importance and influence of other Orthodox intellectuals within Latin American anarchism, namely Leo Tolstoy. Tolstoy's appeal as a literary figure helped to embed his anarchism in different sectors across the continent. He appealed to intellectual and urban elites, particularly those with libertarian agendas. His practical and educational approach in establishing anarchist colonies appealed to working class social movements looking for viable alternative models of human community free from the state and church hierarchies. José Julien Laguna Thomas notes that Tolstoy's writing was amongst the most widely circulated in working class pamphlets and cultural magazines in early 20th century Latin America. Tolstoy was also, like Rhoda, influential in spreading the anarchist practice of pacifism throughout the region, particularly in Costa Rica. The reception of Tolstoy's anarchism in Costa Rica was aided by his direct links to Proudhon, Bakunin, and Kropotkin, his promotion of a primitive Christianity as an alternative to unjust, immoral, and unnecessary modern state and church enabled anarchism in Latin America to tap into the deep well of Christianity across the continent, while also contesting and rejecting the church. The reception of Tolstoy's Christianity as a critique of state and church power structures and social hierarchies will prove to be a lasting influence on contrasting political movements in the region led by liberals, libertarians, Marxists, and anarchists pushing for a social-political revolution. The influence of Bakunin, Rhoda and Tolstoy on anarchism as a political movement in Latin America is remarkable, particularly in the light of the fact that all three proceed from the context of Orthodox Christianity, either with a bitter rejection of that or a promotion of it based on a primitive form of Christianity as critical theory, directly related to their own experience of orthodoxy. It would be wrong to leave the impression that Rhoda and Tolstoy's Christianity as critical theory exercised and exercises more influence in the region than Bakunin's anti-clerical and anti-religious anarchism. While I've spoken about the influence of figures like Bakunin, Rhoda and Tolstoy on Latin American anarchism, it would be remiss to limit this presence and influence only to well-known names of anarchism. Equally important to the flourishing of anarchism as a political movement in the region has been the participation of anonymous Orthodox migrants, mainly lay people, in anarchist groups. In the River Plate region from the 19th century onwards, anarchism was replenished by waves of migration from Europe, including Eastern, or indeed Orthodox Europe. The development of anarchist printing presses, the establishment of pamphlets and magazines among the urban working classes, and the dissemination and translation of anarchist texts from the European movement was taken up by a wide variety of migrants who entered into urban life in Latin America through artisanal jobs like shoemaking, cabinet making, baking, engraving. In other words, the dissemination of anarchism and its ideas was not restricted to liberal and libertarian Latin American national elites. This observation draws in orthodoxy, although at present it's difficult to find the precise sources in the emerging ethnographic material. However, we do know Orthodox migration to Latin America was largely concentrated in urban centres. We also know that the staging ports for this eastern migration were often European ports where anarchist ideas circulated, and we know that many Orthodox migrants engaged in artisanal trades. Buenos Aires, as the principal city in the River Plate region, is also the location of the oldest Orthodox church in Latin America. The story of anarchism and orthodoxy in Latin America may well be one of a squeezed presence, but it's a presence nonetheless. The 19th and 20th centuries proved crucial to the import of both to the region, and the presence of leading anarchists and their relationship to Orthodox Christianity proved influential in shaping the practices of the different tendencies in anarchism in the region. The fact that Bakunin briefly spent time in Latin America during his exile is noteworthy. It gives Latin America a direct place within his life and legacy, one that's not only derived from his influential ideas and practices on anarchism more generally. It introduces an anti-church and anti-religious position to the emerging anarchism in the region, and this anarchist tendency contributed to excluding the Roman Catholic Church from nation building at the time of independence, and was a foil to the rise of nationalist populist discourses in the early 20th century. However, Bakunin's influence must be set alongside other anarchists in the region, particularly Rhoda in Mexico, Tolstoy's literary and artistic influence throughout the region, and later Berdiev's influence on 20th century politics and theology in the region, especially under the military dictatorships which denied freedom. Rhoda Canati's promotion of a primitive Orthodox Christianity to counter the excessive enlightened rationalism of Roman Catholicism and Protestantism in the region offers a significant departure from Bakunin's position, and one that found widespread sympathy with intellectual and political elites keen to curb the power of the institutional church while preserving their indigenous Christianity. Rhoda Canati's vision offered the possibility for a wide range of groups in Latin America to be Christian without the institutional church, a perspective that continues to prove to be eerily current among some Protestant and evangelical ecclesiologies in the region today. However, it's in the person of Berdiev that anarchism and Christianity in Latin America find their most consistent tendencies in the region. His books are translated or disseminated in the region. Unlike his theological counterparts, including the great Russian theologian Sergei Bulgakov, the broad tendencies of freedom, love, creativity, dignity, equality, pacifism, collectivist action, revolution, suspicion of power structures of church and state are all developed within liberation theology, most notably through Juan Luis II's reading of Berdiev. This anarchist and orthodox contribution to Latin American politics in the 20th and 21st centuries demonstrates the squeezed yet vital contribution of anarchism to orthodoxy and the region.
Thank you for listening. To help others find anarchist essays, please rate and review us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're interested in anarchist ideas, why not check out the journal Anarchist Studies? For over 20 years, Anarchist Studies has been publishing original research on the history, theory, and practice of anarchism. For more information, visit www.lwbooks.co.uk/anarchist-studies.